So, just for the sake of continuity, and since it was such a profound paragraph, the last one, I'll just reread it. Explanation was, I feel as much as was required was done yesterday. And then somebody can read the next paragraph. Ritu Di is expected to join, and Archana ji will join at 8:15. So I'm just reading. Okay. The Vaishnava form of Vedantism, which has laid most stress upon.
Hello,
Yes, hello.
Anmol, can you increase the font size?
Font, okay. Is it okay now? Arora ji, is it okay now? Arora ji, is it okay now?
हाँ थोड़ा सा बढ़ा सकते हो?
और बढ़ाऊंगा तो फिर मेरे स्क्रीन में फिट नहीं होगा.
नहीं, ठीक है, इट्स ओके. ओके, ऑल राइट, ओके.
Okay, all right. Okay. The Vaishnava form of Vedantism, which has laid most stress upon this conception, expresses the relation of God in man to man in God by the double figure of Nara Narayana, associated historically with the origin of a religious school, very similar in its doctrines to the teaching of the Gita. Nara is the human soul, which, eternal companion of the divine, finds itself only when it awakens to that companionship and begins, as the Gita would say, to live in God. Narayana is the divine soul, always present in our humanity, the secret guide, friend, and helper of the human being. The Lord who abides within the heart of creatures of the Gita. When within us, the veil of that secret sanctuary is withdrawn, and man speaks face to face with God, hears the divine voice, receives the divine light, acts in the divine power. Then becomes possible the supreme uplifting of the embodied human conscious being into the unborn and eternal. He becomes capable of that dwelling in God and giving up of his whole consciousness into the divine, which the Gita upholds as the best or highest secret of things. Uttamam Rahasyam. When this eternal divine consciousness, always present in every human being, this God in man, takes possession partly or wholly of the human consciousness and becomes in visible human shape the guide, teacher, leader of the world, not as those who living in their humanity yet feel something of the power or light or love of the divine gnosis informing and conducting them, but out of that divine gnosis itself, direct from its central force and plenitude. Then we have the manifest avatar. The inner divinity is the eternal avatar in man. The human manifestation is its sign and development in the external world. One example I had forgotten to give yesterday. Number one, first of all, I had forgotten to read this footnote yesterday about the part possession. I had put it on the group, but still, Chaitanya, the avatar of Nadia, is said to have been thus partly or occasionally occupied by the divine consciousness and power. Right? So I guess this is why I remembered the example of Chaitanya for this case. Couple of things here. One, very clearly what he's saying is that the divine who is within us, the God who is in man, that same God, when it takes a visible human shape and form in an external body, external to us physically, then that is the manifest avatar. In other words, there is no difference between the human embodiment of the divine, like Rama, Krishna, Sri Aurobindo, etc., and the divine who is within us. It is the same divine which manifests in the human form as the avatar. Okay, इस context में the shloka of the Gita which clearly says that in this body is the highest Purusha, that is 13.23. Okay, Upadrashta Anumanta cha Bharta Bhokta Maheshwarah Paramatmeti Chapyukto Dehesmin Purushah Parah. Okay, Upadrashta mane witness. These are the different poises or states of that self, that supreme self. So Upadrashta, Anumanta, the sanction giver, Bharta, the supporter. Basically, without whose support, the being cannot exist. The whole machinery of nature cannot function without the secret support of that divine. All right. Bhokta, the enjoyer of nature. All that goes on in the human nature, in the nature in general, the enjoyer of that. Creation, as we should remember, has been created because of Ananda. There are two chapters in the Life Divine: the delight of existence, the problem; delight of existence, the solution. So I think in the first of them, first paragraph itself, he says that having been free, I will paste the exact line. I know where to locate it. The divine having been free, whether to create or not, perfectly free. The divine, one of the most common understandings is that he is perfectly free, he is not bound, right? So, whether to create or not, that freedom was also there to the divine. So, that freedom being there, if he chooses to create, it can only be for one reason, and that reason is delight. Okay. In this context, I have seen Sri Aurobindo quoting on multiple times, means 2-3 times, this Sanskrit from the Taittiriya Upanishad. Anandat heva khalvimani bhutani jayante. From Ananda, Anandat, Chaturthi Ekvachan, Anandat heva khalvimani bhutani jayante. All these beings, imani bhutani, they have come from Ananda. Anandena jatani jivanti, having come into being, jatani. It is by Ananda, Anandena, that they are living, jivanti. Okay? And where are they going? Anandam prayanti, abhisamvishamti iti. They are going towards Ananda, prayanti, and it is finally into Ananda that they are going to enter completely, samvishanti. So basically, the beginning is Ananda, the middle is Ananda, and the end is Ananda, like that. And the reason for creation is Ananda. Okay. So, Bhokta
Anmol,
Pitham.
just one question here.
Yes, please. Yes, yes.
In the paragraph that you read, he categorically distinguishes between the divine soul, and when he says Nara, he
And the
talks
human
about
soul.
the
Yeah.
human soul, right?
Yeah.
And he says this delight that you are referring to, it can be achieved when the human soul completely, that line is also there in what you read right now.
When it
He
finds
says
its
that when
eternal companionship with the divine.
correct, that when it becomes one with it, that is where it becomes that state of delight and ananda. So the fact that there are these two very different entities that are being referred in this paragraph, yesterday you had mentioned that one of them you kind of gave it the terminology
They
based
are
on
not very different. If I had said yesterday, what I had said was that if you take the human soul as the Manomaya Purusha, or you take it as the combination of the Manomaya, Pranamaya, and Annamaya Purusha, these three in turn are a projection of the Chaitya Purusha, that is the psychic being or the Antaratman, which in turn is nothing but the individual form of the Supreme Divine. So it is that divine soul only which becomes the human soul. So they are not disconnected.
Okay.
They are not disconnected. Or
So
This
one
is
term
one way
was
to,
psychic being and the other was psychic. There were two terms you used for both of them. As what were the terms you used? Psychic being and psychic?
no, I did not use another psychic term. मैं उतना डिटेल में
Okay.
नहीं गया था. What I had said
Okay,
was
okay. So it was
that
psychic
there
being.
is,
I get it.
yes, psychic being. And psychic being in the traditional terminology, in the Kathopanishad, for example, it is called Purusho Antaratma. So that Purusha, which is the Antaratma. Okay. Chaitya Purusha, the
Perfect.
term used by Sri Aurobindo in his letters, I am not sure where exactly in which Sanskrit writing it is there. I have not been able to find out. But the word which he uses is psychic being, which basically means the divine element in us, the evolving soul, and basically our true individuality. Again, I mean,
So the psychic being is which out of these two souls that are
inmost,
referred in this
inmost.
paragraph?
Yes. The
Okay,
psychic being, you
perfect.
can say, is the divine soul. Again,
Okay.
इसमें भी ना, I'll say this, मतलब again I'll reiterate जो मैंने कल बोला था, it is important, so no problem. जो जैसे मैं वो श्लोका कंप्लीट कर रहा था, ठीक है, भर्ता भोक्ता महेश्वरः, एंड देन उसमें लास्ट में एक वर्ड आता है पुरुषः परः. ओके, तो व्हाट आई हैड सेड यस्टरडे वाज कि stick to the word purusha because the word itself denotes the supreme and highest in some cases and in some places in the literature, right? But even to be absolutely sure you don't want to have any doubt, you say paraha purusha. Okay? He is the highest
Okay.
purusha. That is what is also called in the divine as purushottama. In this shloka only it is called paramatma, parameshwara, param brahma, all this param param param, right? That
Correct.
paraha purusha, okay? That supreme divine, which is the all and beyond all and other than which there is nothing, etc., etc. When it takes an individual poise, the Sanskrit word for individual is jiva. Okay, so 15.7 of the
Jiva.
Gita is the shloka for that. Mamai vamsho jiva loke jiva bhutah sanatanah. Mamai vamsho, my portion indeed, my portion alone, etc. It is verily an eternal portion of me that becomes a jiva in the world of jivas. This is what the Gita says, right? So when that
Okay.
highest purusha, it takes an individual poise, it becomes you, it becomes me, etc. That is like the first step, you can say. Again, to take that individual poise, it takes that poise through its divine nature. इसीलिए उसमें आएगा परा प्रकृतिर जीव भूत. It is the para prakriti, it is the higher nature, what is in Tantra called the Shakti, the divine mother, which becomes the jiva. Right? Like in human reproduction, how it happens. That it is through the mother that the child is born, like that. So that sort of example.
Right.
So that is the individual purusha. ठीक है? Then that individual purusha, again मैं उसमें डिटेल में जाऊंगा ना तो it's going into another direction. It's all related, but फिर वो गीता का जो वो चीज है ना वो थोड़ा सा ब्रेक हो जाता है. That's all.
Okay.
जो
Fair
है
enough.
टेक्स्ट का, राइट? तो जो मैं श्लोका बोल रहा था, उपद्रष्टानुमंता च भर्ता भोक्ता महेश्वरः. महेश्वरः literally means the great lord, महा ईश्वरः. परमात्मेति चाप्युक्तः. It is also called the Paramatma. Now the last quarter is the most important, very important. Dehe asmin purushah parah. ठीक है? अस्मिन जो है वो हिंदी में बन जाता है इसमें. देहे अस्मिन हिंदी में बन जाएगा इस देह में, इस देह में. ठीक है? देहे अस्मिन. No matter how many times one needs to repeat this to oneself, ये conceptually to begin with understand करना fundamental है. देहे अस्मिन
Right.
पुरुषः परः. In this body is the supreme Purusha. ठीक है? वही,
Right.
that supreme Purusha, that God in man, that when it takes a human form, manushim tanumashritam, this is the phrase used in the Gita, then that is the manifest avatar. But it is important to understand there is no essential difference between that God in man and that which comes in the form of the avatar. There is no difference. इसका एक
Right.
example which I had forgotten to share yesterday, मुझे आज याद आया when I was at the Samadhi, कि in the Ramayana, I mean the serial that I saw by Ramanand Sagar, उसमें एक जगह दिखाते हैं, it's a sweet example. I think the source of it would be the Ramcharitmanas. So there is a rishi called Sutikshna, Suteekshna. He is a disciple of Agastya. So he is in the forest and he is meditating, and he is meditating on the inner divine. I'm sure I'll be able to find out that video and share the link here, the snippet. Okay. So as he is meditating in the forest, वो ध्यान में लीन है, and he is seeing the divine within him in the form of a light. अपने heart region में he is able to see it. कल मैंने था ना, पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो, जो यम ब्रह्मा वरुणेंद्र रुद्र मरुता का लास्ट वाला है. ठीक है. So he's seeing that and he's वो उसमें रमे हुए हैं. Then Rama, in his due course, when he comes in the Dandakaranya and he's visiting all the rishis, so he comes at the door of Sutikshna also. So the way I guess Tulsidas shows it and the way they saw it, they showed it in the serial, he stops seeing this thing inside his heart. And he is wondering and he becomes disturbed. What happened? What happened? Why have I stopped seeing? मेरा तो सारा ध्यान का अभ्यास वगैरह क्या हो गया उसको? And then he opens his eyes and he finds Rama in front of him. I mean, it's just a way of showing that what you are seeing inside you, now that same very thing is there. वो एक flesh and blood में है यार. Now you just don't need to have a subtle vision. Now you can have everything. He is there in a physical form. So that's why. No, it's a very sweet sort of example. Obviously, a genius like Tulsidas, उसकी जो रामायण है, तुलसीदास जी की रामायण, I'm sorry, उसकी बोला मैंने, उनकी जो रामायण है, Sri Aurobindo has called it a supreme masterpiece. So, I mean, if Sri Aurobindo has called it so, then who are we? You know? So that was one example which I had forgotten to say. Now we can start reading from the next paragraph. Who will read? There are 6 other participants. Yogesh ji, will you read?
Yeah, it starts from when we thus understand.
No. I'll just lower the font. वो थोड़ा ज़्यादा बड़ा था. Yes, when we thus understand from here.
Right.
Yeah, 1 second. I think Arora ji finding it difficult maybe. If I make it bigger, is it awkward for you to read this, or you can still read it?
No, I'm reading from the app. I'll read it, no problems.
All right.
When we thus understand the conception of avatarhood, we see that whether for the fundamental teaching of the Gita, a present subject, or for spiritual life generally, the external aspect has only a secondary importance. Such controversies as the one that has raged in Europe over the historicity of Christ would seem to a spiritually minded Indian largely a waste of time. He would concede to it a considerable historical but hardly any religious importance. For what does it matter in the end whether a Jesus son of the carpenter Joseph was actually born in Nazareth or Bethlehem, lived and thought and was done to death on a real or trumped up charge of sedition, so long as we can know by spiritual experience the inner Christ, live uplifted in the light of his teaching, and escape from the yoke of the natural law by that atonement of man with God, of which the crucifixion is the symbol. If the Christ, God made man, lives within our spiritual being, it would seem to matter little whether or not a son of Mary physically lived and suffered and died in Judea. So too, the Krishna, who matters to us, is the eternal incarnation of the divine and not the historical teacher and leader of men.
Right. Thank you. So, very important point he's making here. When we thus understand the conception of avatarhood, we see that whether for the fundamental teaching of the Gita, our present subject, or for spiritual life generally, the external aspect, which means to say the divine taking a human form, has only a secondary importance. It is no doubt important, but it is not of primary importance. ठीक है, this can hit you strongly, this can hit anybody strongly कि what is he saying. Something can appear even scandalous कि he's almost saying that कि भगवान का जो अवतारहुड है उसका कोई सबसे बड़ा महत्व नहीं है, right? But then he'll clarify what he exactly means. Such controversies as the one that has raged in Europe, इसमें जो वो बोलने वाले हैं, if you remember in the third paragraph he had said कि in the Western civilization, in the European civilization, the idea of avatarhood has not really taken root because it has been presented through exoteric Christianity and all that, through dogma. तो वहां पे वो इतना आइडिया उतना मेच्योर नहीं हुआ है, उतना डेवलप नहीं हुआ है. Whereas in India, it has grown up as the logical outcome of the Vedantic view of life, right? So this is the reason why this kind of controversy takes place in Europe. Okay, so such controversies as the one that has raged in Europe over the historicity of Christ would seem to a spiritually minded Indian largely a waste of time. Okay, largely a waste of time. He would concede to it a considerable historical. Okay, not that it is not important. From the historical point of view, it has a considerable importance. Otherwise, there is a big gap in history, right? In the letters, we find at one place Sri Aurobindo arguing with Dilip Kumar Roy that there was somebody who was there who filled the place of Rama. If you don't accept Rama, then somebody should have been there, but that historical gap needs to be filled. There was somebody who was the avatar of the Sattvic mind, right? So the historical importance is there, okay? But hardly any religious importance. For what does it matter in the end whether a Jesus, son of the carpenter Joseph, was actually born in Nazareth or Bethlehem, lived and taught and was done to death on a real or trumped up charge of sedition, so long as we can know by spiritual experience the inner Christ. Okay? The emphasis is on the inner divinity, inner Christ, inner Krishna, all that. Okay? Live uplifted in the light of his teaching and escape from the yoke of the natural law by that atonement of man with God, of which the crucifixion is the symbol. Now, I don't understand this, I mean, the Christian symbolism very clearly, but what I could understand basically is, okay, he's crucified, and then, that whole sense of atonement, ki we crucified the Son of God himself, that leads to a change in heart in that part of the world. So, Sri Aurobindo writes in his aphorism, Christ from his cross humanized Europe. Okay. So basically that unrefined and brutish part of nature that got worked upon, okay, especially in that part of the world, right? So live uplifted, escape from the yoke of the natural law. The natural law is the law of the animal, basically. The human nature with its animal part and all its defects and deformations. So basically that is what the crucifixion stands for, okay? If the Christ, God made man, okay, God made man. If God has become man, then man must become God. Savitri में इस तरह की lines हैं, not exact. Lives within our spiritual being. The whole emphasis is on the divinity within. ठीक है? It would seem to matter little whether or not a son of Mary physically lived and suffered and died in Judea now. As I said yesterday, कि अगले paragraph का जो last sentence है, this is one of the most important sentences from the point of view of practical spirituality. हमारे अवतार रोड वाला जो previous series था, we had repeated this almost in every class. Okay, so to the Krishna who matters to us is the eternal incarnation of the divine and not the historical teacher and leader of man. The historical thing is important from the point of view of historicity. अगले ही paragraph में वो अपने आप को semi correct करेंगे. Okay, but the Krishna who matters to us is the eternal incarnation of the divine, that which is within us constantly. इसके लिए मैंने एक तो वो 13.23 शेयर किया था ग्रुप पे, एक 18.61 है ईश्वरः सर्वभूतानां, then there is 15.15 of the Gita, सर्वस्य चाहम हृदि सन्निविष्टो, I am there in the hearts of all. Okay, then there is 10.20. So there is एक दो नहीं है, बहुत सारे श्लोक हैं गीता में इसके लिए. 10.20 is अहम आत्मा गुडाकेश सर्वभूता शयस्थितः. I am the self, O Arjuna, in the inside everybody, और वहां पे heart word नहीं है, but inside everybody, like that, right? So this idea of the eternal incarnation of the divine and the internal divinity, and once more I am saying that same divine that same Supreme Purusha, again those four words, Dehe Asmin Purushaha Paraha. हिंदी में अगर करें, इस देह में, that Supreme Purusha is there. Nothing short of that Supreme Purusha is there in this body. Dehe Asmin. Okay. This idea has evolved as the knowledge has evolved. So in the Veda, जो मर्त्येषु अमृतम बोलते हैं, that is actually a reference to Agni. Okay, but Agni is only a god. He is an aspect of the divine. वहां पे कितना clearly ये बोला कि the very highest, and because Agni is not supreme, Agni is a aspect of the supreme. So that's what I'm trying to say. The idea itself has evolved, and it is in the Gita that the idea is given very, very clearly for the first time. That in this body, maybe in the Upanishads it is there in some clarity. I will have to find out the exact verse or not. But the Gita leaves no ambiguity whatsoever in the matter that in this body, okay, this is actually the reason why the human body is most precious, because that Supreme Purusha, the way he is present in the human body, he is not present even in the gods. The gods are also like a projection of the Supreme, which is why in order to realize the Supreme Purusha, you have to don the human body. There is a famous example about Durga from the Mother's Agenda among the devotees of Sri Aurobindo and Mother, that Durga in the puja days, she would come in the ashram atmosphere and she would be around Mother and all that. But through the mother's body, now pay attention to the word, through the mother's body, because mother was in a human embodiment, through the mother's body, Mother Durga, she experienced a complete surrender to the Supreme. To experience that total and complete surrender to the Supreme, she had to identify herself with the mother's body. By herself, in her own subtle body, that experience was not possible to her. That experience is possible only with the human embodiment. This is not something new. You all must have heard this kind of thing earlier, but this is just an occasion to re-emphasize this very, very important point. Okay, this is the value, this is the glory, this is the greatness of the human body, कि इसके अंदर the very Supreme Purusha himself is there. Okay, so one second. Yeah, so the Krishna who matters to us is the eternal incarnation of the divine. As I had said yesterday, the phrase eternal incarnation sounds like an oxymoron. Incarnation, you think that it is chronology, mein wo aaya and then he goes, but you are saying eternal. What is meant is the divinity which is constantly inside human beings. I know this idea is quite familiar, especially in Indian culture and all, but then again, the other ideas of Dvaita Bhakti and Salokya Mukti and all that, they tend to overpower and we forget that the divine is within us, right? That is why I'm probably taking, more time than needed to emphasize this idea. Now, since we have paused here, any questions or anything to say, discuss at this point? Otherwise, the next paragraph can be read by someone. No, nothing. Who will read the next one? Who would like to read? Arora ji, will you read?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so this one. In seeking the kernel of the thought of the Gita.
Okay. In seeking the kernel of the thought of the Gita, we need, therefore, only concern ourselves with the spiritual significance of the human divine Krishna of the Mahabharata, who is presented to us as the teacher of Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. The historical Krishna no doubt existed. We meet the name first in the Chandogya Upanishad, where all we can gather about him is that he was well known in spiritual tradition as a knower of the Brahman. So well known, indeed, in his personality and the circumstances of his life, that it was sufficient to refer to him by the name of his mother as Krishna, son of Devaki, for all to understand who was meant. In the same Upanishad, we find mention of King Dhritarashtra, son of Vichitravirya, And since tradition associated the two together so closely that they are both of them leading personages in the action of the Mahabharata, we may fairly conclude that they were actually contemporaries and that the epic is to a great extent dealing with historical characters, and in the war of Kurukshetra, with the historical occurrence imprinted firmly on the memory of the race. We know too that Krishna and Arjuna were the object of religious worship in the pre-Christian centuries, and there is some reason to suppose that they were so in connection with the religious and philosophical tradition from which the Gita may have gathered many of the elements, and even the foundation of the synthesis of knowledge, devotion, and works, and perhaps also that the human Krishna was the founder, restorer, or at the least one of the early teachers of this school. The Gita may well, in spite of its later form, represent the outcome in Indian thought of the teaching of Krishna and the connection of that teaching with the historical Krishna, with Arjun, and with the war of Kurukshetra may be something more than a dramatic fiction. In the Mahabharata, Krishna is represented both as the historical character and the avatar. His worship and avatarhood must therefore have been well established by the time, apparently from the 5th to the 1st century BC, when the old story and poem or epic tradition of the Bharatas took its present form. There is a hint also in the poem, the story or legend of the Avatar's early life in Vrindavan, which, as developed by the Puranas into an intense and powerful spiritual symbol, has exercised so profound an influence on the religious mind of India. We have also in the Harivansh an account of the life of Krishna, very evidently full of legends, which perhaps form the basis of the Puranic accounts.
Right. Thank you. So, again, he's coming back to the crux of the whole matter, our demand and need from the Gita. What is it that we are really seeking as the kernel and core of the Gita's teaching, or what are the main points in its teaching, right? So in seeking the kernel of the thought of the Gita, kernel means जो वो अंदर का एकदम जो seed होता है, the deepest part of it, the core of the teaching. In seeking the kernel of the thought of the Gita, we need therefore only concern ourselves with the spiritual significance of the human divine Krishna of the Mahabharata. The divine Krishna who has taken a human form, okay, who is presented to us as the teacher of Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So it's very, very clearly saying that our business is with the internal divinity, that eternal avatar, and with the spiritual significance of the Krishna who is there. We are going to concentrate on that. Shweta has messaged. Okay. The historical Krishna no doubt existed. Now, I mean, for those who have faith in Sri Aurobindo, these words should be enough to dispel any doubts if they come because of European scholarship or even Indian scholarship for that matter. The historical Krishna no doubt existed. I'm saying this also on the basis of some things which are published in Sri Aurobindo's writings. There is something called Trikala Drishti. Okay, it is a siddhi. So in the record of yoga, which is Sri Aurobindo's yoga diary, one can find the systematic development of this Siddhi in Sri Aurobindo. So I am at least in my mind and heart, I am absolutely certain that through that Trikala Drishti, he has even confirmed the existence of Krishna. Even वैसे उन्होंने देखा हुआ है. Here, obviously, he cannot say such things. So here he is presenting his views like a scholar and, in a sort of academic and intellectual way. Right? So the historical Krishna, no doubt, existed. We meet the name first in the Chandogya Upanishad. Why does he say first? Because in the chronology of scriptures, Mahabharat jo hai, that is supposed to come after the Upanishads. That is why he's saying first in the chronology. Jo aata hai, first is the Veda Samhita, then the Upanishads. So, and Chandogya is one of the older Upanishads. That much is known. Okay? So we meet the name first in the Chandogya Upanishad, where all we can gather about him is that he was well known in spiritual tradition as a knower of the Brahman, so well known indeed in his personality and the circumstances of his life that it was sufficient to refer to him by the name of his mother as Krishna, son of Devaki, for all to understand who was meant. This much is clear. There is no real explanation needed here. In the same Upanishad, we find mention of King Dhritarashtra, son of Vichitravirya, and since tradition associated the two together so closely that they are both of them leading personages in the action of the Mahabharata, we may fairly conclude that they were actually contemporaries and that the epic is to a great extent dealing with historical characters and in the war of Kurukshetra with a historical occurrence imprinted firmly on the memory of the race. Again, here Sri Aurobindo is being as objective in sense of academic, he's not making any assumptions as such. The language is such that any rational mind or any which does not want to believe in prehistoric things, because Krishna is called prehistoric by modern scholarship of history, etc., that is also not offended. That is why he's using such an objective language here. Here I might say, just as a point, ये जो उपनिषद वाला है, so there what comes is कि Krishna, it's not a very big portion, मुझे उसका verse number वगैरह अभी याद नहीं है, but basically he takes initiation from a rishi called Ghora Angirasa. So Krishna takes this rishi as his teacher. Ghora means obviously intense. घोर मतलब घोरम कर्म बोलते हैं. घोर मीन्स मतलब जो तपा हुआ है और बिल्कुल एकदम इंटेंस एंड कैन इवन से वायलेंट ऑस्टेरिटी वगैरह उस टाइप का. बेसिकली वायलेंस का भी सेंस उसमें आता है द वर्ड घोरा. अंगिरसा इज अ लाइन ऑफ ऋषिज coming from the very ancient Vedic times. It's a line of rishis. All right. So this Ghora Angirasa is the teacher of Krishna, and he just says, this is something interesting. That's why I'm saying it's not part of the text. He says to Krishna 3 words. Achyutam asi, Akshitam asi, Prana samshitam asi. Okay. I'll repeat. Achyutam asi. You are Achyutam. Achyutam माने infallible, जो च्युत नहीं हो सकता. च्युत मीन्स टू फॉल. आई मीन जैसे आजकल पदच्युत होना, कि कोई अपने एक स्टेटस से या पद से गिर गया. तो अच्युता मीन्स दैट विच कैनॉट फॉल. सो यू आर इनफॉलिबल इन दैट सेंस. ओके. अच्युतम असि. अक्षितम असि. यू आर इनडिस्ट्रक्टिबल. ये असी वही है, तत्वम असी वाला असी. और उसके बाद स के ऊपर छोटी ई की मात्रा. अक्षितम असि. यू आर इनडिस्ट्रक्टिबल. एंड प्राण संशितम असि. You are that which is the source of all prana, or that which is having all prana. Sam का मतलब होता है totality. तो exact मुझे English translation इसका कभी याद नहीं रह पाता for some reason. But basically, you are that which is having all energy inside you, or you are the source of all energy, something like that. And the interesting bit is that just these 3 words are sufficient for Krishna to attain enlightenment. This is the most interesting part and most staggering part. In fact, in another place in Synthesis of Yoga, Sri Aurobindo cites this example where he gives the example, where he tells the importance of the Guru. And he says that even Bhagavan, even God, when he comes, then to uphold the tradition, that knowledge must be passed from a Guru to a Shishya. So even he takes a Guru, but by the rapidity of his progress, he shows that he had done it basically to set an example, and he gives the example of Sri Krishna and Ramakrishna Paramhansa. Because in Ramakrishna's life also, Totapuri, I mean, he had been trying after that Nirvana and Samadhi, Nirvikalp Samadhi for 30 years. 30 years, 30. And he was still not sure whether he had attained it fully. And he just initiated Ramakrishna and he just shot into Samadhi. So he was just left, agape ki ye kya ho gaya yaar? What kind of a person is this? So it shows that this kind of avataric beings, when they come, they to set the example, they make a guru. They don't really need it. Sri Aurobindo obviously does not give his own example, but his example is also very much valid. That he sits with Lele and 3 days actually in one. It's not actually 3 days, actually in one. आप लेटर अगर ध्यान से पढ़े तो आता है. In one day he had the realization of nirvana. It's just, mind blowing. Throwing all thoughts. What was the method that he did? कि Lele told him, something practical, and somebody can do this. This is the fastest way of silencing one's mind. So Lele tells him that sit in meditation and you will see that thoughts are coming to you from outside. Okay? Sri Aurobindo says, I had never heard. मुझे पता ही नहीं था. See, he was a politician. He was a poet. This is what he basically was. योगा वगैरह वो कर रहे थे पिछले 4-5 साल से, but yoga was not his main preoccupation at that time. वो उतना करते थे जितना उनको शक्ति बिल्ड वगैरह करने के लिए चाहिए होता था. तो he was innocent. He had never even heard of such a thing कि thoughts coming to you from outside. So but he did not question. This is the beauty. This is that Shraddha. Shraddhavan labhate jnanam, बिना श्रद्धा के कुछ नहीं होता. So he had perfect Shraddha in Lele's words. Lele said, sit in meditation and you will see that thoughts are coming to you from outside. Before they enter into you, fling them away, throw them away from you. And he did this. He was just instructed. And sounds so simple, but he said, I just sat and did it. And in 3 days, actually in one, my mind became as silent as a windless air on a mountain peak. This is the analogy he gives. My mind became as silent as a windless air on a mountain summit. So, I'm sorry, thoda sa isme detour aa gaya, but I'm sure this must have been at least somewhat interesting, right? So, yes. Yeah. We know too that Krishna and Arjuna were the object of religious worship in the pre-Christian centuries. Now, before I read this, never known that Arjuna also was worshipped. I am sure in India today also, there are some temples here and there in some parts of the country for Pandavas. Arjun ka bhi ho sakta hai. But at least as far as I am concerned, I never knew that Arjuna was also worshipped. But then again, as I said yesterday, I think wo Indra ka incarnation hai, one, and he represents that Nara. He represents that human soul, and he is the protagonist of the Mahabharata. So he's a very great hero in that sense, right? And there is some reason to suppose that they were so in connection with the religious and philosophical tradition from which the Gita may have gathered many of its elements and even the foundation of its synthesis of knowledge, devotion, and works. Basically, he's trying to trace the evolution of the thought of the Gita. Okay, so there is a lot of, there is some element of supposition involved in this. Some things which he has not clearly said, obviously because they were not necessary, otherwise he would have written it here. And perhaps also that the human Krishna was the founder. Now see, restorer. This word would not have been used just like that. तो वो पहले से चलता आ रहा होगा, and he probably restored it. In fact, he says this in the beginning of the 4th chapter कि ये ज्ञान मैंने शुरू में दिया था, but in the passage of time it got lost, and now I am again giving it back to you after a long gap of time. Imam vivasvate yogam proktavanaham avyayam vivasvan manave praha manurikshva kave bravit evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu. It was known among the rajarsis. Sa kale neha mahata yogo nashtah parantapa. In the great passage of time, this yoga was lost. Sa evayam maya tedya yogaha proktah puratanaha bhakto sive sakha cheti rahasyam hetaduttamam. That yoga, adya means today, I am giving to you again because you are my friend and devotee. These are the first 3 verses of the 4th chapter, right? So, restorer, or at the least, one of the early teachers of this school. Now, the Gita, again, ye Gita ka uska evolution hai. Interesting in itself, everything is interesting, but our main focus is on the divine teacher and what he's trying to tell us about him in this chapter. So, the Gita may well, in spite of its later form, represent the outcome in Indian thought of the teaching of Krishna. ये मैंने पहले भी बोला था कि अगर कोई डाउट करे किसने क्या, अगेन वेरी क्लियरली इन लेटर ऑफ Sri Aurobindo, whoever wrote the Gita, exact words I am quoting Sri Aurobindo, whoever wrote the Gita was a great yogi and certainly received his inspiration from Krishna. Inspiration के लिए the Sanskrit word is Shruti, most pure word. So certainly received his inspiration from Krishna, right? No doubt about that. Teaching of Krishna and the connection of that teaching with the historical Krishna, with Arjuna, and with the war of Kurukshetra may be something more than a dramatic fiction. Again, as I'm saying, he's trying to be perfectly objective. Taki, no kind of mind is basically takes offense or is not convinced. Of course, you cannot do it. You cannot convince everybody. वो कितना भी आप objective हो जाओ, somebody who is not having the bare minimum faith तो वो नहीं मानेगा. तो but still, he's being as objective as possible in the way he's writing. All right. With Arjuna, in the Mahabharata, Krishna is represented both as the historical character and the avatar. दोनों है at once महाभारत के अंदर ये, ठीक है. His worship and avatarhood must therefore have been well established by the time, apparently from the 5th to the 1st centuries BC. Now again, I mean, I had not seen, I was not aware of this kind of thing. Since coming from Sri Aurobindo, that level of authenticity भी क्या ही बोले, perfectly authenticity, this is history which is teaching us कि कृष्णा का वो अवतारहुड वगैरह कब फिक्स हुआ था, between the 5th and 1st centuries BC, he says. इसका एक रीजन ये भी है कि the Puranas, they took their, मतलब जो उनका वो फॉर्म है, around the 4th or 5th century AD, in the Gupta period. This comes somewhere in the evening talks of Sri Aurobindo, right? So when the old story and poem or epic tradition of the Bharata took its present form. Again, Mahabharata का भी जो original version था, it had only 8,800 verses. It was called Jaya. ठीक है? Then it got expanded to, I think, 24,000, and then finally it got expanded to the current one, जिसके अंदर 1 lakh verses है. At present, I mean, since the mention of Mahabharata is there, and to complete that part, दो main आते हैं. One is by the Gita Press Gorakhpur, which is in 6 volumes, Hindi Sanskrit ka, which is read by most people, those who want to read the Mahabharata. If you want to have the most critical edition कि इसमें कुछ भी एकदम trimming किया हुआ है, all the inaccuracies are removed, then that one is by the Bhandarkal Oriental Research Institute in Pune. जो अपना B.R. चोपड़ा वाला सीरियल बना था, उसके बिगिनिंग में क्लियरली आता है कि दिस सीरियल इज बेस्ड ऑन द महाभारत एडिटेड बाय द भंडारकल ओरिएंटल रिसर्च इंस्टीट्यूट. दिस इज फॉर, उसमें कितने वर्सेस हैं एग्जैक्टली आई डोंट नो, बट हियर अगेन a historical education he is giving to us that the Mahabharata took its present form somewhere between the 5th and 1st centuries BC. मैंने इसके अलावा मैंने कहीं नहीं पढ़ा, एंड श्री अरविंद का कहना मतलब उससे ज्यादा प्रामाणिक कुछ हो नहीं सकता, राइट? So there is a hint also in the poem of the story or legend of the avatars, early life in Vrindavan, which as developed by the Puranas into an intense and powerful spiritual symbol, has exercised so profound an influence on the religious mind of India. Mostly it is obviously the Bhagavad Puran, जिसके अंदर ये mentioned है. Another is only Arora ji actually told me about it. It's called the Brahma Vaivarta Puran, which has the life of Krishna. उसके अंदर ये वृंदावन वाला story है and all this. Vishnu Puran के अंदर कितना है, I would not be able to say. I have not gone through it. Through the Bhagavad Puran and through the Brahma Vaivarta I have gone through. Now, why he is mentioning Harivansha in the next one? We have also in the Harivansha an account of the life of Krishna. The reason for this is that Harivansha is considered as a खिला ग्रंथ. खिला बोलते हैं उसको, ख के ऊपर छोटी ई की मात्रा ल, खिला ग्रंथ टू द महाभारत. खिला is basically appendix. So Harivansha is an appendix to the Mahabharata. Here Sri Aurobindo is taking Mahabharata as the main text for the historical as well as the avataric Krishna. All right. That is why यहाँ पे हरिवंश का उन्होंने mention किया है after mentioning the Mahabharata. All right. So we have also in the Harivansha an account of the life of Krishna, very evidently full of legends, which perhaps form the basis of the Puranic accounts. Here I might just say कि the TV serial made by Ramanand Sagar in the mid-90s, उसमें all these Bhagavad Puran, Mahabharata, Harivansha, they were all referred. I mean, whatever level of scholarship they were able to do, it was pretty well made for those times, right? So this much is there. I'm not really sure कि इसमें कोई questions होंगे, but still, any questions or any comments or anything to share? Otherwise, we have around 10 minutes. We had started at 8:07. We can at least read the next paragraph once. if not covered
Alok,
fully.
I have a small point to ask.
Yes,
If you
please.
can
Please,
clarify.
please go ahead. Yes.
ये ऊपर जो उसले वो पैरा, let the para show.
You want to see the paragraph?
Yes, yes.
Yes, please.
The beginning of the paragraph
Yes.
is Aurobindo says, this is 1 minute where I think he says Krishna and Arjun
Dhritarashtra.
both were, no, not that. Before that, he says that they were already a part of religious worship.
हाँ,
I
ये
think
रहा. We
which
know too that Krishna and Arjuna were the object of religious worship in the pre-Christian centuries.
yes, this of course I am not aware, but if you can throw
Yes.
some light on this, not today, any other
Hmm.
time.
Actually,
No,
for
see,
this,
नर नारायण का रेफरेंस तो भागवत में आता है, तो
yes,
कृष्ण अर्जुन उसी के रेफरेंस में आता है.
yes, yes, yes,
कृष्ण
yes,
और अर्जुन और नर नारायण एक ही है. So this is
yes, yes,
described in the Bhagavad.
yes,
But they
yes.
were Christian century से पहले, they both of them were worshipped. Must have been as Nar Narayan only.
Right.
So
As Nar Narayan, हाँ, yeah, yeah.
I'm just
Actually,
presuming
इसके लिए
because I
तो
am
yeah.
no
ये
it,
लोग पता नहीं है. Honestly, I
for
don't know the answer to this. कि
it
how
doesn't
Arjuna
matter for a devotee, all historicity has no meaning.
exactly that.
Doesn't matter.
Exactly.
You
Exactly. The
carry on.
Krishna who matters. मैं एक बार वो हाईलाइट कर देता हूँ जो सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट सेंटेंस है आज का. The Krishna who matters is to us is the eternal incarnation of the divine and not the historical teacher and leader of man. Right. So we'll just read the Archana ji, will you please read the next one? But all this though of considerable importance.
But all this, though of considerable historical importance, has none whatever for our present purpose.
Here.
We are
So
concerned.
emphatically, he's saying it is having considerable historical importance. Mind the difference between mere historical importance and importance from the point of view of our spiritual growth. Okay? But none whatsoever. I mean, it requires some courage to write like this. कि कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता उससे. None whatsoever for our present purpose. Our present purpose being to find the kernel of the Gita and for that to identify what really Krishna stands for in the Gita. Please read. We are concerned.
We are concerned. We are concerned only with the figure of the divine teacher as it is presented to us in the Gita, and with the power for which it is there stands in the spiritual illumination of the human being. The Gita accepts the human avatarhood, for the Lord speaks of the repeated, the constant manifestation of the divine in humanity. When He, the eternal, unborn, assumes by His Maya, by the power of the infinite consciousness, to clothe itself apparently in finite forms, the conditions of becoming which we call birth. But it is not this upon which stress is laid, but on the transcendent, the cosmic, and the internal divine. It is on the source of all things. It is on the source of all things and the master of all, and on the Godhead secret in man. It is this internal divinity who's meant when the Gita speaks of the doer of violent asuric austerities, troubling the God within, or of the sin of those who despise the divine lodged in the human body, or of the same Godhead destroying our ignorance by the blazing lamp of knowledge. It is then the eternal avatar, this God in man, the divine consciousness, always present in the human being, who manifested in a visible form, speaks to the human soul in the Gita, illumines the meaning of life and the secret of divine action, and gives it the light of the divine knowledge and guidance, and the assuring and fortifying word of the Master of existence in the hour when it comes face to face with the painful mystery of the world. This is what the Indian religious consciousness seeks to make near to itself in whatever form, whether in the symbolic human image it enshrines in its temples, or in the worship of its avatars, or in the devotion of the human guru, through whom the voice of the one world teacher makes itself heard. Through these, it strives to awaken to that inner voice, unveil that form of the formless, and stand face to face with that manifest divine power, love, and knowledge.
My God, what power in this text. I'm actually so benumbed by the Shakti in this कि कितना टाइम बचा है 9:03. But all this, though of considerable historical importance, has none whatever for our present purpose. We are concerned only with the figure of the divine teacher as it is presented to us in the Gita, okay, and with the power for which it there stands in the spiritual illumination of the human being. Okay. Here I might say that Sri Aurobindo makes a distinction in the synthesis of yoga between the Guru and the Param Guru, the Supreme Guru. So Guru can be somebody, okay? कैसे भी हो सकता है, but जो Supreme Guru है, that can only be the God inside you. That nobody else can be. And until that Supreme Guru's guidance is, मतलब one starts listening to it, the real fulfillment cannot happen. The Gita accepts the human avatar. आज खत्म नहीं हो पाएगा because it won't be able to finish. But here the Maya wala point at least I can cover. The definition of Maya which he gives here. The Gita accepts the human avatarhood, 4.5, 4.6. For the Lord speaks of the repeated, the constant manifestation of the divine in humanity. ये है bahuni me vyatitani janmani tavacharjuna tanyaham veda sarvani natvam vetha parantapa. This is the shloka. Bahuni me vyatitani, many are the births जो व्यतीत हुए हैं, ठीक है. bahuni me vyatitani janmani tavacha, and yours also, O Arjuna. Tanyaham veda sarvani, I know all of them. Tani aham veda sarvani natvam vetha parantapa. You do not. मदर के वॉल्यूम 3 में 1929 to 31 वाला जो कॉन्वर्सेशंस वाला वॉल्यूम है, देयर एट वन प्लेस मदर आल्सो सेज, वो ज्यादा बड़ा ग्रुप नहीं था, 10-12 लोग थे. मदर सेज वी हैव ऑल मेट इन प्रीवियस लाइफ्स. तो दिलीप कुमार रॉय का तो it is quite well known who he was and all that, how Mother and Sri Aurobindo met him earlier. So the same thing Mother is also saying there. Okay, we have all met in previous lives, right? When he, the eternal unborn, assumes by his Maya. यही जो मैं वो अजोपि सन्नव्ययात्मा भूतानाम ईश्वरोपि सन् प्रकृतिं स्वामधिष्ठाय संभवामि आत्माया. Now what is the definition of Maya? By his Maya, what is Maya? The power of the infinite consciousness to clothe itself apparently in finite forms. Why apparently? Because what you are seeing as finite, is it really finite? If you put it under a microscope or something even stronger, then it starts revealing its energy patterns, and basically you see an infinite play of energy. So where is finiteness then, right? That is why. So Maya, this is the right definition of Maya. एक मैंने लाइट डिवाइन से भी आई थिंक ग्रुप पे डाला था व्हाट्सएप पे. द पावर ऑफ द इनफाइनाइट कॉन्शियसनेस टू क्लोथ itself apparently in finite forms. This is Maya. All right. 9.6. The conditions of becoming, which we call birth. But it is not this upon which stress is laid. This माने this assuming the human form. इसके ऊपर स्ट्रेस नहीं है. इसमें गीता के अंदर मुश्किल से 3-4 श्लोक हैं 4th चैप्टर में. That's it. Otherwise मानुषीम तनुमाश्रितम एक जगह आएगा 9th चैप्टर में. The stress is not on this. The stress is on the inner divinity and of becoming an instrument of that and all that. But it is not upon this which stress is laid, but on the transcendent, that which is beyond everything. Trans का मतलब होता है across. So ascendant, descendant, transcendent. This is how the words are formed. So transcendent means that which is beyond the boundary of manifestation, the cosmic and the internal divine. Cosmic का literally मतलब होता है that which keeps everything in order. The word cosmos is the opposite of the word chaos. So cosmic is that which keeps everything in the universe in order, right? And the internal divine. On these the stress is there. There are shlokas cosmic के लिए है, वासुदेव सर्वमिति, transcendent के लिए है in the 9.4 and 9.5, right? Internal के लिए I had already told in the beginning of the class. It is on the source of all things. The source of all things is the transcendent, and the master of all, this is the cosmic. And on the Godhead, secret in man. वो secret है. It's not evident. To find it, you have to do sadhana. You have to make that effort. कल मैंने वो just it's अर्पण to बोल रहा था, he was saying the right thing, but just one of those bhakti के लिए japa is one of the methods, and clearly here it is saying that Narayana is the basically the sangya, the noun of the God in man. उसको नारायण बोलते हैं, and I mean you do it and it can be felt. It's a very simple method of connecting with that inner divinity. Right. So 9.8, I'll stop here. Next time I'll restart from this paragraph. Any question, anything to share? Otherwise, we'll pause here. This is other, I mean, it's a heavy text, so digest नहीं हो पाता इससे ज़्यादा एक बार में. Right. ठीक है. Then we'll just keep silence for half a minute, and we'll. I'm sorry, इस Sunday को there was a little confusion, तो वो chanting वगैरह का मैंने बोला नहीं, तो we have done it only once in 3 weeks. So I'll try कि coming Sunday को in the morning, Friday or Saturday को I'll try to put a message on the group. Those who are interested can join for that. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Anmol, if you stop the recording, I had one query which we'll discuss on the next call.
I've stopped the recording.
Yeah, perfect. In this, it says in the line that you read, and obviously we'll get into the details when you explain it next time. It says the painful reality, master of existence in the hour when it comes face to face with the painful mystery of the world.
Exactly, because that's the thing before him, na Arjuna. He knows that he's a protagonist, or the destiny of the battle is in this chariot and all that. तो उसे मालूम है कि मुझे एक्ट करना है, मेरे पे इतना कुछ डिपेंड करता है. But at the same time, he's faced with the prospect of killing Pitamaha and Drona and all these people. What is all this about? मतलब for that you have to feel those verses in the first chapter कि वो कितने बड़े moral dilemma में है. So that painful reality कि इस सब का पर्पस क्या है. अगर आप कह रहे हो कि ये धर्म की रक्षा के लिए है, तो अगर यही सब लोग नाश हो जाएंगे तो धर्म की रक्षा कौन करेगा? All the arguments which he gives in the first chapter. So that what is the use of all this if such a bloody massacre is required? It is, even to imagine that is so painful for him. Basically that is what he's referring to. Right. And of course all that we see around us as the painful reality of the world, वो पेन का, वो सावित्री का जो सेक्शन है ना, पहली बात तो उस कैंटो का टाइटल में ही आता है, द वे ऑफ फेट एंड द प्रॉब्लम ऑफ पेन, एंड पर्टिकुलरली दैट सेक्शन, उसमें द रैशनल ऑफ the rationale of pain in the evolution is given very, very beautifully by Sri Aurobindo. It's poetry, of course, so one has to have little bit of that poetic thing, but it's not very difficult. काफी मतलब, and it makes a lot of sense, obviously. तो आप उसको पढ़ेंगे. In the meanwhile, you can get a lot of clarity from that.
Right. And Anmol, you had given references on the last week call, because this paragraph ends back with the same point. You had done a bit of elaboration on this in the previous last week's call, coming face to face, because it ends with the same point, saying that through these it strives to awaken to that inner voice, unveil that form of the formless, and stand face to face with that manifest divine power, love, and knowledge. It's very powerful.
Very
It ends
powerful.
with this, that this is a possibility that you can experience. You had given us a couple of references where you had talked about this, and at that call, I remember I checked. If you could just repeat those where this face to face aspect was, you referred to a couple of things on this point. If you could just repeat that.
I had pasted few excerpts from his letters where he talks about
Right.
the possibility of meeting Krishna face to face, hearing his voice. ये मैंने कल वो आप कल के व्हाट्सएप मैसेजेस देखेंगे ग्रुप पे तो उसमें डाला हुआ है, बट उसमें भी आई माइट टेल यू ही सेज कि आप कृष्ण को देख लो, आप उसको सुन लो और ये सब जो है, बट दिस इज नॉट द सुप्रीम थिंग. द सुप्रीम थिंग इज द चेंज ऑफ नेचर. द सुप्रीम थिंग इज रियलाइजेशन. द सुप्रीम थिंग इज कॉन्टैक्ट विद द इनर डिवाइन. द सुप्रीम थिंग इज भक्ति. इस तरह से दो और चीजें वो उसमें बोलते हैं. तो इट इज स्टैगरिंग दैट यू नो व्हाट द वे ही इज सेइंग दैट. आप किसी भक्त को बोलो कि कृष्ण को देखना सबसे बड़ी चीज नहीं है, वह थप्पड़ मारेगा आपको एक खींच करके. बट देन यू नो दैट काइंड ऑफ भक्ति इज नॉट द अल्टीमेट भक्ति. द अल्टीमेट भक्ति इज ज्ञानी वाला भक्ति कि यू नो दैट देर इज नो डिफरेंस बिटवीन यू एंड हिम, एंड यू नो उसके साथ वो रियलाइजेशन होना, उसके अंदर वो इटर्नल अबाइडिंग होना उसकी कॉन्शियसनेस में. दैट इज द मेन थिंग. वो रेफरेंसेस ऑलरेडी वो ग्रुप पे डाले हुए हैं. यू विल जस्ट हैव टू सर्च द वर्ड कृष्णा. आपको
I'll search
कल
it,
रात
yeah.
को जो डाले थे उसमें मिल जाएगा.
Perfect. Because I remember you gave a good, you again had talked about it, and then you put up those references for us. So this means ये कल वाले में है.
Yes, they were pasted last
It's in
night on the WhatsApp group. You will, if you
Done,
have to search word Krishna या उसमें voice डालो, या तो voice से एक तो मिल जाएगा wherein Sri Aurobindo tells of his own experience कि in a well-known voice, in 3 words he got the आदेश, go to Chandar Nagar. वो भी मैंने copy paste किया था कल. And the other one where he says that it is possible to see Krishna, hear him. It's actually very amazing. जब मैंने पहली बार पढ़ा था, I was like, wow, क्या बात कर रहे हैं यार. मतलब रियली मिला जा सकता है, देखा जा सकता है, बात करी जा सकती है. बट प्रॉब्ली फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम yesterday मुझे भी वो रियलाइज हुआ कि ये भी हाईएस्ट नहीं है. जो असली एक बार देख लिया आपने, मान लो, ऑफ कोर्स इफ यू सी कृष्णा इट इज गोइंग टू हैव एन इंडेलिबल इम्पैक्ट, नो डाउट अबाउट इट. बट स्टिल if you are lazy and if you don't make the effort for the constant union, then आपके नेचर में चेंज नहीं आया, you remain as selfish as you were, then what is the use? That is why उसका जो खास करके लास्ट पार्ट है ना, कि the supreme thing is the realization, the contact, the bhakti, etc. etc. तो वो उसको नजरअंदाज नहीं करना है. Of course face to face and all is necessary. मैंने खुद ही कल बोला था कि vision being our chief sense, ठीक है, among the 5 senses. Unless we see, we can never have satisfaction. So there is no doubt that vision is necessary, but it is not the ultimate thing. The ultimate thing is becoming one with the divine to the extent, यार जब आप एक ही बन गए तो क्या देखना और क्या ना देखना यार. मतलब he is within you, you are in him. Krishna says, यो माम पश्यति सर्वत्र सर्वम च मयि पश्यति तस्याहम न प्रणश्यामि सच मे न प्रणश्यति. ये 6.30 में आता है कि he who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, from him I am not separated, and such a person is not separated from me. These are the real things.
Correct. Because you can't see with the eyes. The 3 things that he's talking about is the divine power, love, and knowledge. Yes. So seeing has to be an experience, as you rightly explained.
Exactly. It has to be experienced. You have to experience that divine power, love, and knowledge within you.
Right. Thank you so much.
Okay, most welcome. ठीक है, then we'll close.
Yeah.